0, 1, 2, 3. Let's get started.
I'm ready for the interrogation.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us today. We wanted to go through some things related to basements. We get lots and lots of people asking questions about basements, clarification things, concern things, and all sorts of stuff. We've invited Dan from Superior Walls to join us. And so I guess actually, Dan, first, before we talk about anything else, Superior feels very intentionally named. Are we trying to downgrade a poured wall by calling this Superior Walls? Like, is that intentionally named that way?
I would assume when the founder created the organization, there might have been a little bit of that jab in there that it is a superior product. That is correct. So it was not named after a lake or a location. So.
Why don't you tell us about what exactly you do at Superior Walls and maybe how you got started there in the first place?
Okay. Yeah, so my role at Superior Walls, I'm, I guess, technically a regional manager. And with that capacity is I'm responsible for basically the business unit all the way from business development through contracting, quoting, the people that are responsible for quoting the projects, help with this design work, and then all the way seeing the project to being installed, and then of course anything after post installation as well. So
Okay.
that would be the soup to nuts of what my responsibility is. It's almost a business manager.
Sure. And how did you get started with Superior Walls in the first place? Were you grow up always thinking about concrete and better doing things, or what was how was your start?
I did not dream about concrete, that is for sure. So I guess how I got started is I had a relationship with Gary Hess, the owner of our Superior Walls licensee, and at one point he had asked me to come in to help mimic some of our more successful salespeople at the time to determine how do we continue to grow the business and become the sales manager for the business. And that's going on 14 years, I guess, in April now. It'll be 14 years. So
awesome. Well, Jeremy can attest to this. We get lots of people that understandably so, are very familiar with a poured concrete wall in the basement, right? And so the idea of Superior Walls, for a lot of people, requires an explanation, much similar to Modular, requires an explanation, and something that we get pretty frequently is questions surrounding the bottom of a Superior Wall and exactly how that works. Because on a poured wall, you would have a footer, right? And so for Superior Walls, there's not, at least in the same function as a poured wall, there's not a footer in that traditional sense.
Well, before we get into the footer, maybe just Dan, give us, why would somebody elect to do a Superior Walls versus a poured wall? I mean, I know from my own experience and what I tell people, but what's the elevator pitch on the Superior Walls?
Well, I think that, to give that elevator pitch to your point there, Jeremy, I mean, one, we're manufactured much like a modular home, how you guys have complete control over a build process in a controlled environment. The Superior Walls is in the same aspect from a quality control standpoint, where we have that control inside a manufacturing facility to regulate all raw materials that come in, to regulate the foam and the insulation that's utilized in the product, to manage our own personal batch plant, to control the density and the compressive strength of the concrete until the product is actually shipped to a site, where then again, we're being a pre-engineered product. We've already done all the homework and the design work for that product. So when it goes into the ground, everything should be seamless. Again, damp proof, does not require additional damp proofing. Scientifically, it's stronger than a poured wall in the same conditions. And then secondly, you have the finishability and the code compliance that's out of the box before, as soon as we leave that day, which is extremely advantageous versus any other product that's on the market currently.
So just to use different language for, for people who might not be following and tracking some of the language you use. So when we say damp proofing, so a traditional poured wall has a rubber wrap around the outside, and you can either do a rubber wrap or you can do a tar kind of application. Typically on a poured wall, it's a rubber wrap. Typically on a block wall, it's tar. And with a superior, and so that's to prevent water coming in from the outside, seeping through the wall, where a poured wall and a block wall is porous, whereas the superior walls, it's not porous. So the concrete, can you talk specifically about why is the superior walls not porous?
So, according to the American Concrete Institute, which is a governing body in the construction world that evaluates concrete and density of concrete and compressive strength of concrete, anything that is greater than about 3,500 psi, 3,700 psi, does not require any additional damp proofing. And what happens in concrete during that curing process, the concrete being a chemical reaction is constantly wanting to grab moisture from somewhere to finish its cure. They talk about the Hoover Dam, for example, is still curing. Whereas with a superior wall, we have to be a minimum density according to our requirements, both as a manufacturer and our PFS, which is a third-party inspection agency. We have to be a minimum density of 5,000. We do a break test, and for each one of our daily break tests for our batches that we pour to validate that we're greater than that 5,000. So we don't want any more moisture. The concrete can't take any more on. It says I don't need it, so we don't require the damp proofing. To your point, Jeremy.
So did you just say that the Hoover Dam is still curing? I feel like that would be concerning to a lot of people to hear that. Because
I'm pretty sure it is. I'd have to Google that. And now I say that, and I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that based on that, it's still curing.
Or maybe as of a couple weeks ago, it finished.
Yeah, there you go. Last week it was. I think it's over now.
That's funny. That's incredible. Okay, so that's talk before we get into sort of going top down, because I know John asked about footers, but in terms of the actual structure of the wall and the engineering, it's talk a little bit about that. I understand it's a ribbed system. That's the engineering design where that gives it greater strength than just a flat system or just a full thick wall. Talk a little bit about that ribbed system, and then why and how that has greater strength.
Right. So the easiest way to describe a superior wall for both construction people that are in the field and people that are also not in the field. If you picture a superior wall built just like a stick framed wall on a modular and or a normal house, where you would have a top plate and a bottom plate, and then every 16 inches on a wood framed wall, you would have a stud. What that's doing is taking a load from above, and it's creating a system that doesn't allow anything to compress. With a superior wall, we're kind of designed the same way. We have a stud every 24 inches on center with rebar in it that is taking the load of the house. All the weight that gets put on it, it's taking and transferring that weight into the virgin ground or into the stone footer. Each one of those studs is designed to withstand 7,000 pounds of load, and they're every 24 inches on center. Or I'm sorry, 11,000 pounds. The uniform load's 7,500 pounds. So you can have 7,500 pounds sitting on top of the wall, and each stud's designed for 11,000 pounds. Typical house, what would you say, Jeremy? A mod is going to come in at about what? 1,500 on a ranch, maybe 1,800 on a two-story, somewhere in that vicinity per linear foot. So the wall is engineered well beyond the capabilities, or well beyond what is actually being applied to it in 99.9% of the situation.
So that's probably a good segue then to John's original question down to footer, because then a lot of people will say, well, it sits on a stone footer, a crushed rock stone footer, and that's concerning to me. Someone who might be more old school, that's concerning to me. I want my wall sitting on a strip footer, and I always tell people, well, what's underneath your footer? Well, stone, right? So eventually you get down to stone, and then below stone, of course, is always virgin ground. So, is there an explanation that you use that's different than that?
No, I think Jeremy, I think you kind of nailed it right there. That is the biggest hurdle that in the superior walls world that we have about convincing or talking to customers regarding the product is that we do sit on what is non-traditional, meaning a stone footer. And to your point, a traditional footer is designed for a certain width to carry the load of the house. And what we do is we take that load of the house, how heavy the house is, and what the ground's like underneath it, the virgin ground, and we make a determination on the stone depth. What that stone is ultimately trying to do is, and this is going to be interesting, it's trying to distribute the load of the house at an angle into the virgin ground. The absolute best analogy that I can ever think of is when you see a train going down the set of railroad tracks, what is that sitting on? It's just
Stone.
sitting on a big mound of stone, essentially. And how much does a train weigh? Lots, let's put it that way. I'm not even going to venture again. And all it's doing is distributing that load down into the virgin ground, the same as a traditional footer. The beauty of a stone footer, however, though, is unlike a traditional footer where you can have the opportunity for what we call hydrostatic pressure. And basically hydrostatic pressure is the groundwater or the water that's around a foundation is under an immense amount of pressure from both being pushed up from the ground and from the side that can penetrate either a block, an ICF, a superior wall, or any other foundation system because water pressure is immense. With a stone footer, if you picture 6 to 8 inches of clean crushed stone and a drain tile, there is no pressure that can be built up underneath that because the water is allowed to freely flow through that crushed stone to a drain tile, to a drainage system to be mitigated out of the foundation system.
That way, and that's just like any foundation system.
Correct. Yes. That part is exactly the same. You have a drain tile that gets the water away. With the stone, though, it allows that water to free up, unlike a traditional footer, which can create a dam, essentially, because you poured a big dam around and then you built on top of it. If that makes sense.
One of the any follow-ups on that, Jonathan, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to really get into the details of what exactly superior walls is because you kind of start to see it in a very different light, and that it's extremely similar to modular. When we talk to people about about a modular home and they ask, well, is it strong enough? And that we often are saying, well, it's actually stronger than a site built home actually because of the way that it's constructed.
Yes.
And it's incredible to see how similar the difference between a poured wall and superior walls versus versus a site built home and a modular home. There's a lot of similarities there. I know one of the questions that we get a lot is related to the seams in the walls because it's coming out in panelized walls, right? And so obviously there's break points in those walls. Is that a weak point in the wall? Is that a weak point from a water standpoint or from a structural standpoint? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, yes, definitely. When the superior wall does come together, to your point, they are a panelized system. So each wall panel does come together, and they're secured at the top and the bottom with mechanical fasteners. And each joint is a shiplap joint where the wall panels are in line. What we do is we have a proprietary high-quality urethane sealant that goes. There's a bead of sealant which we call the mating seam. This is where they come together, and then there's a bead on the outside and a bead on the inside. The unique thing about that sealant, and I've experienced it myself, is quite often that bond, much like liquid nails that you guys use in the modular home industry to attach your subfloors or your sheetrock, it ultimately is almost as strong as the concrete. I personally have seen sealant that has to get cut when we have to separate panels versus being able to just be pulled apart, and at times it adheres well enough to actually break the concrete. With those 3 beads of sealant, you would have to have, for a water penetration to occur, it's got to break the outside seam, get through the mating seam, through a shiplap joint, and through the inside seam before you're going to actually experience it inside the structure.
That's interesting. Jeremy, what's some of the things that you, from an on-site standpoint, or maybe after the home is completed, and that you see people asking about a lot related to superior walls, or maybe just a foundation in general, any foundation system?
Well, a typical service question is going to be around cracks.
Sure.
So when all foundation cracks, I think someone said there's only two types of only two types of concrete: concrete that's cracked and concrete that's not yet cracked.
That's
And
very true,
so,
Jeremy.
I think that's very, very typical, very, very typical for cracks to occur. It has to be quite big for it to be reflective of any kind of structural issue, because the concrete is held together with an immense amount of rebar and that kind of thing. And so 99 and those can be but for a homeowner, it can be alarming if you're not familiar with just concrete in general. And so on a floor, when you pour a concrete floor, obviously you cut relief joints or you trowel relief joints where you would prefer to have the cracks managed within. On a wall, obviously there's no relief joints or anything. Cracks can occur, and that's the way it is. From your perspective, can you just speak to that at all in terms of hairline? When I see a superior walls crack, it's a hairline crack. That's purely
Yeah,
cosmetic. But
you are
can you give some
100%
color
correct, Jeremy.
commentary on that?
Concrete, it cracks. And two things with superior walls: if you do experience those hairline cracks in our manufacturing process, when we are pouring our walls, we do get that cream, which they call it cream in the industry, which is where the smooth part of the concrete comes to the top. And you do experience some hairline cracks from time to time. Typically, those cracks are just subsurface, and we've done plenty of investigations after having 18,000 of them in the ground, that they are just a subsurface crack. They cause no structural issues, and they do not cause any water penetration problems in those hairline cracks. But to your point, yes, being in a controlled environment, having control over our mix, and knowing the fact that we put the right amount of fiber, we have the amount of rebar, and what you had asked earlier, Jonathan, regarding the panelization, that urethane does give that concrete the ability at times to move and ebb and flow versus a rigid system. It doesn't actually open the seam up, but it does give you an expansion joint, which you will see sometimes when you're, if you out and about and you look at a sidewalk, as you start to look into, educate yourself more about building, you see, oh, look, they got a expansion joint that's out of urethane, or a foam expansion joint. That just gives the concrete the ability to move.
That's interesting. I didn't actually think about the control seams, between panels acting as an expansion joint. That's pretty interesting. Do you have a on the video description? We'll put some links to superior walls and things like that. Is there a link that you can provide that shows sort of the like a whiteboard explainer video, or some kind of video that shows the rebar and the mesh and just the construction method of the superior walls? I know you guys do a lot of, Superior Walls is a national company, and you're a local supplier for them, and so I know the national company does a lot of these kinds of things.
Definitely.
Is that something you have access to, that we can put a link into the description
marketing
for?
type information that'll even show the whole process from a short little video potentially of a manufacturing facility showing it being built, and cross sections, to your point, that shows where the rebar is placed and the point of the rebar.
That's cool. We do we do a lot of we stopped through COVID doing factory tours, but most of the factories allow for factory tours now. I haven't had anyone really ask for a factory tour of Superior Walls, but if a customer is considering Superior Walls,
definitely.
is that something
they're
that
welcome
you
to
guys
come
are
to a
open
tour,
to
and if,
at all, or not?
again, you probably invite them to a set when we do have a set for you to see it on the field side, but they're welcome to come to the plant as well, as long as we just get a little notification. Somebody can take them through the plant, show them the process.
That'd be cool. One of the things that I like about Superior Walls from a construction management perspective is that you guys cover quite a broad radius. And when you start going out into areas that are fairly remote, Finger Lakes, Adirondacks, Lake George, Hudson Valley, um, out in rural areas of Western New York and Pennsylvania and these places, it can be sometimes a challenge scheduling with a local, foundation company. I mean, there's a lot of great local poured wall companies as well. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes, like I say, if you're in a remote area, there might not be as timely. The contractors might not be as timely. And with Superior Walls, we'll get on the schedule, and you guys are like clockwork. Once we get on the schedule with you, it's very dependable in terms of your scheduling
For sure.
for the installation of the walls. And point to consider as well beyond some of the other things. And then from a costing standpoint, from our perspective, the costing of the wall, a lot of people think Superior Walls are much more expensive than a poured wall, but from our perspective, they're basically in line price-wise with a poured wall when you factor in the wall wrap, the exterior wall wrap, and then the interior insulation requirement. And then, of course, if you're going to finish your basement, then you also got to factor in the stud requirement of studding out the exterior, or the interior portion of the wall, and then also you lose a little bit of square footage studding that out. The other thing I mentioned is that with Superior Walls, yes, it comes insulated to meet the R value requirements in the basement, but if you're going to finish your basement, then you can actually over insulate and bring that R value up, even higher. And so those are some of the things that I personally like about Superior Walls. Pricing being right in line with what you would expect from a local contractor. And if you're in a remote area and there's limited contractors, that price, based on supply and demand, might actually be, quite a bit more for a poured wall than a Superior Walls. And so, we appreciate
No.
that from you guys. Did you want to speak
No,
to that at
I do.
all?
Yeah, I
Any
appreciate
of
it,
those points? I
Jeremy.
brought up quite a
And
bit
you're
of
100% right. It
information there.
seems like in those markets that are flooded with, like you said, good poured wall contractors, we really shine in those rural areas where it's a little bit more challenging for someone to potentially, service those accounts as a poured wall contractor or a standard mason. And on the same lines, I think it's very important to understand that Superior Walls, when we had these negative degree temperatures, as long as that stone's not frozen and is winter protected adequately, which you guys are very good at it, and you can explain that to your customers what you do to protect that stone from freezing, we can set all year round, which does not hamper the building cycle at all. And when you marry that with you being a modular home builder and Superior Walls, it gives you the opportunity to continue the business all year round. Versus it's got to be 28 and rising. Is my concrete going to freeze if I'm a cast in place system? So there's a lot of opportunities for winter builds as well.
I mentioned just a little bit of the process flow for Superior Walls versus a poured wall, which is they're slightly different. So because some people say, well, I've heard different things about Superior Walls, whether they're good or bad, and my response is typically, well, that's any errors that you would have found on a Superior Walls would be user error. That would be an issue with the procedure of how you install a wall. And so, well, a poured wall, you would excavate, put your footers in, put your stone in your drain tile, put your footers in, pour your wall. After you get X amount of days cure, you can backfill that wall. Whereas the Superior Walls, you excavate and you put your stone and tile in, put the walls in. Before you excavate, you first need to set the modular house, or if you're building a stick-built house, you have to put that floor deck on, and you need to pour your basement floor, the flat work in your basement, the basement concrete floor. Then you can backfill. And so from a modular perspective, you dig, stone tile, walls, set the house, pour the floor, or if it's, that's a covered pour, or if it's summertime, you can, set the walls, pour the floor, then set the house, and then backfill. You have to do it in that sequence for the engineering requirements of the walls. Otherwise, you can, run into problems by pushing the walls over, essentially. And so, as long as you adhere to the installation manual of the superior walls, there's no issues. I do recount an issue I had on my personal house years and years ago. I don't know if you remember, out in Pendleton many years ago, we had a real long wall at the back, and the bracing on the inside of the wall, because there's bracing under the floor joist for the top side of the superior walls. I didn't do it properly, and as a result, that back wall creeped in a little bit on me on the top, and so I had to excavate the back portion of that wall out and reset that wall. And just to push that wall out, we used probably just some come-alongs, things of that nature, to pull that top wall out a little bit when you didn't have the pressure of the backfill. I think we jacked the house just slightly, pulled that wall out, reset it, rebraced it on the inside the way that it is supposed to be done. That was my oversight. And then we backfilled, and then that was good. It was good as gold. And so some of those kinds of issues that people might bring up, I say, well, that's a user, or that's an installation, error that you might, that might have caused an issue. But, just like anything, you have to follow the procedure, especially if it's an engineered system, like a house and a basement, things of that nature. But, John, you got anything else?
No, I know, Dan, we appreciate your time. I know you got another meeting here coming up here. So just one last question that I would ask, actually, just out of curiosity. I've had people ask some interesting questions before about things like building a whole house out of superior walls and these sorts of things. What's one of the most interesting
wow, that's a
builds
good
that you've
one.
been a
We've
part
done a
of?
lot of unique things where we've stacked superior walls, 3 stories tall. We've jumped outside of the box and designed a superior wall that's 18 feet tall.
Really?
Where it was a garage for someone, and they put trusses on the top. And not taken away from you guys as home builders, but there's been a lot of superior walls above grade applications where it's a basement, the floor system, wood floor system gets put in, and then another superior wall is stacked on top, and then they put trusses on top. So that whole gambit, it's there. But for the point of our conversation,
Wow.
We do basements. How's that? We do basements.
Well, we like, like someone said, we like building stuff. Our preferred method is modular, but when people come with an idea for their home or their project, we try to understand what it is that they're trying to achieve. And if we can do it modular, we want to help out and be a part of the project. But if their vision is best realized through traditional stick building, or with some other unique unconventional methods like what you're just talking about, we'll be the first ones to offer the right path for them. And that might not be with us, and that's okay, because we want to add value to people's ideas, and most of the time we can do it modular. Some of the time we can't,
Yes.
and that's all right. That's totally fine. So, but yeah, no, I appreciate it, Dan.
Will do.
I know you're a busy guy. Say hi to Gary. We go back a long ways as business partners.
And if
so
you have questions, you want to jump on this later, if something comes up, just let me know, and we're happy to talk to you guys. Stay warm and have a good weekend, guys. Yes.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
See you, gentlemen.
Thanks for setting it up, John. I appreciate you guys.
We'll see ya.
Take care.